Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving right into the fascinating life and the towering legacy of a true 7th century literary genius, Banabhatta. If you've ever found yourself wondering exactly how the genres of historical biography and complex romantic fiction really found their footing in ancient India, well, you are in the right place. We're going to take a close look at a man who somehow transformed deep personal tragedy and a life of wandering into some of the most intricate, breathtaking prose the world has ever seen.
To give you an idea of his impact, there's this incredibly famous ancient Sanskrit saying, Banochistam jagat salvam. Basically, it translates to the idea that Bana described everything in the world so thoroughly that absolutely nothing was left for later writers. It perfectly captures the sheer reverence history holds for his descriptive mastery. Just imagine having such a profound command of language that centuries later, critics and scholars alike throw their hands up and say, well, he already covered everything. That's the level of mastery we're unpacking today.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, who was Banabhatta? Next, early life and wandering. Then, the court controversy, followed by his pioneering literary accomplishments. After that, we'll cover modern scholar feedback. And finally, 5 points of legacy. Let's jump into Section 1. Who was Banabhatta? A quick summary. So, Banabhatta, usually just called Bana for short, was a brilliant 7th century scholar and poet. He's probably best known for serving as the Asthana Kavi, or chief court poet, for Emperor Harshavardhana of the Pushyabhuti dynasty. Now, this was an absolute golden era for northern India, and Bana was sitting right at its cultural epicenter. But beyond his royal day job, the big takeaway here is that he's widely credited with pioneering the historical biography in ancient India. You see, before Bana, the classical Sanskrit literary landscape was overwhelmingly dominated by metrical poetry. We're talking verses bound by strict mathematical rhythms, where prose was often just seen as purely utilitarian. Bana completely shattered that paradigm. He proved unequivocally that prose could be just as rhythmic, just as emotional, and just as rhetorically powerful as any verse. He crafted these sweeping, symphonic paragraphs that elevated prose to the absolute highest echelons of literary art.
Moving on to Section 2, Early Life and Wandering, the Making of a Scholar.
Bana's life actually began in a place of privilege, but it was very quickly marked by profound grief. He was born into a prestigious family of Vatsyana Brahmins in the village of Pratikata, which is near modern-day Bihar. He received a highly disciplined early education you'd expect for someone of his elite social standing, but then tragedy struck. He lost his mother, Rajadevi, when he was very young, leaving a massive void in his childhood. And then his father, Chitrabhanu, who had really become his primary guide and mentor, passed away when Bana was just 14 years old. So thrust into the world as a young, grieving orphan, he didn't do what was expected. He didn't retreat into the quiet life of a traditional scholar. Instead, he embraced a highly adventurous, almost bohemian lifestyle. He chose to wander extensively across northern India, essentially turning his personal loss into a catalyst for an unparalleled education in the university of the real world.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. During his travels, he didn't just cloister himself in libraries or only hang out with elite scholars, which frankly would have been the strict expectation for a Brahmin of his lineage. No, he journeyed with an incredibly diverse group, completely rebelling against the rigid social hierarchies of his time. His traveling crew included his half-brothers, sure, but also a snake doctor, a goldsmith, actors, dancers, and all sorts of wandering intellectuals. This wide, unfiltered exposure to different social classes and professions was profoundly unusual for someone of his caste, but it gave him deep, unparalleled insights into the human condition. He learned how everyday people spoke, what they feared, and what they celebrated. It gave him the rich, authentic tapestry of human experiences that would eventually fuel his incredibly vivid storytelling.
All right, Section 3, The Court Controversy, Facing the Emperor.
So, as you might guess, the transition from carefree wanderer to royal courtier was definitely fraught with controversy. After a brief return to his home village, Bana was suddenly summoned to the emperor's camp by a royal courier named Mekalalaka. But he was walking right into a trap of rumors. Because of those years spent wandering with such an unconventional, diverse group of friends, jealous courtiers had been actively slandering him to Emperor Harsha. They painted him as a great libertine, basically calling him a man completely lacking in moral character and totally unfit for the dignified presence of royalty. You have to understand the immense danger here. Crossing an absolute monarch back then could mean exile or far worse. He essentially walked into his very first meeting with the most powerful man in northern India, already condemned by vicious court gossip.
But here's the thing. He did not cower under the pressure. Instead, he delivered a passionate, incredibly eloquent defense of his character. He looked directly at the monarch and said, "The nature of people is proverbially capricious and strange. They spread scandals as they please, but the great should investigate the truth." By appealing directly to the emperor's wisdom and sense of justice, Bana effectively cleared his name on the spot. He managed to secure Emperor Harshavardhana's complete favor, brilliantly transforming his greatest critics into front-row witnesses of his swift ascent to chief court poet.
Let's turn to Section 4, Pioneering Literary Accomplishments, Masterpieces of Sanskrit.
Bana's enduring legacy is built primarily on two monumental pillars. The first is the Harshacharita, or the Deeds of Harsha. This is a groundbreaking work because it's widely considered the very first historical biography in the Sanskrit language. He masterfully blends the actual historical events of the emperor's life with grand, sweeping poetic embellishment. The second pillar is Kadambari. This is an incredibly intricate romantic novel renowned for its highly complex subplots. It weaves this epic tale of lovers whose destinies are entwined across multiple lifetimes through reincarnation. We're talking cursed princes, mystical elements, and deep philosophical musings on the nature of love and duty. And what's deeply poignant about Kadambari is that Bana actually passed away before he could finish it. The final concluding portion was seamlessly completed by his devoted son, Pushanavapada.
Now, to really understand why these works are so revered, we have to look at exactly how he wrote. He perfected a highly ornamental style of writing known as Gaudiya, or Chitrakavya. This is an elaborate, heavily pictorial prose style. Imagine reading a sentence that feels like you're physically wandering through a dense, breathtaking forest. That's Bana. It's characterized by exceptionally complex sentence structures. Sometimes a single sentence can span several pages. He uses immensely rich metaphors, lyrical descriptions, and an absolute abundance of clever puns. In Bana's style, a single word or phrase might carry 2 or 3 completely different meanings, depending on how you read it. He successfully elevated Sanskrit prose into a deeply visual and auditory art form that totally rewards the careful reader.
But beyond their immense artistic merit, his texts serve as absolutely critical historical lenses. Because of Bana, we have vivid, detailed snapshots of early medieval Indian civilization. His writings meticulously documented the administrative structure of Harsha's empire. He gave us first-hand accounts of the peaceful coexistence of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism during that era. He even thoroughly detailed the inner workings of massive cultural and educational institutions like the famous Nalanda University. Through his prose, we learn about the rigorous daily routines of the monks, the vast libraries, the towering observatories, and the intense philosophical debates that echoed through those halls. His fiction and biographies are absolute treasure troves for modern historians trying to piece together the nuanced reality of 7th century India.
Which brings us to Section 5, Modern Scholar Feedback, a Polarizing Legacy.
When we step back and objectively view the modern scholarly debate around his work, it is sharply divided. On one hand, you have incredibly high praise from luminaries like Rabindranath Tagore and V.S. Agarwal. They strictly revere Bana for his polyphonic cadence, the deep romantic emotions he effortlessly evokes, and the profound mystic symbolism layered into his texts. But on the other hand, you have some very stern criticism, notably from 19th century Western scholars like Weber and Peterson. They critique his work for being overloaded with epithets, filled with tautology, which is just a fancy way of saying he repeats the same thing twice using different words, and displaying an overall exhausting bombast that can slow down the narrative to an absolute crawl.
Actually, there's this one harsh Western critique that perfectly captures this frustration. It describes Bana's prose as an Indian wood where all progress is rendered impossible by the undergrowth and malicious wild beasts in the shape of unknown words. It's a very colorful way of saying that his intense artistry and complex vocabulary can completely overwhelm the modern reader, making it incredibly difficult to just follow the basic story. It just goes to show how a style celebrated as the absolute pinnacle of artistic achievement in 7th century India can sometimes be perceived as an impenetrable thicket to readers from a totally different era and linguistic background.
Finally, Section 6, 5 Points of Legacy, Summarizing the Master. Let's pull all of this together. These 5 essential points perfectly encapsulate his remarkable transition from a wandering orphan to a foundational pillar of classical literature. Number 1, he pioneered the historical biography in Sanskrit with the Harshacharita. Number 2, he authored Kadambari, giving the world a true cornerstone of early, complex romantic fiction. Number 3, he perfected the rhythmic, deeply elaborate Gaudiya prose style. Number 4, he unintentionally became a master historian, preserving invaluable sociopolitical records of 7th century India. And finally, number 5, he left a polarizing yet completely undeniable influence on every single classical Indian writer that dared to pick up a pen after him.
I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Look at the literature, the movies, and the historical dramas we consume today. They all blur the lines between hard fact and beautifully embellished fiction, don't they? How does Banabhatta's seamless blend of strict historical narrative and boundless imaginative fiction, created well over millennia ago, continue to secretly influence the boundaries of our modern storytelling? It is absolutely fascinating to think that the creative echoes of a 7th-century poet wandering the ancient plains of northern India alongside a snake doctor and a goldsmith might still be shaping the very way we tell stories to each other today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I encourage you to keep exploring.